Okay. And I just want to say, if you ask any questions, those will go ahead and show up on the recording as well. If you don't want your voice recorded, it's okay to drop those in the chat. I'll be watching that and responding to any questions there as well. Okay. All right, so first things first, I mentioned that we have a new CCS website premiering on Monday, October 11th. The biggest thing that will impact library staff is that this website will use the same login that you use for L2. So if you're registering for continuing education on the L2 website, it'll be the same login that you use for that site. So you'll want to make sure that you have that handy on October 11th so that you can access the CCS website, your minutes, and any documents that you would typically reference using our website. The way that that works is we've actually worked with Rails and L2 to use their API to sync the L2 calendar and the profiles contained in L2 with our website. So what that means is any event that is entered in L2 and labeled for CCS will automatically show up on our website. Library staff contact information that's updated in L2 will also show up on our website. So it's a nice, easy back and forth. So you only have to update information on L2. You don't have to do it on our website as well. So when something changes at your library, for example, you hire a new person, somebody retires, as long as you've made that change in L2, it will also show up on the CCS website. The biggest thing you'll want to make sure of is that the credentials for your library staff are available to them, so they're not shocked by the move to L2. And you also want to make sure that the profiles of you and your library staff are also up to date. So for example, it might be a good idea to log into your own L2 account, and if your job title has changed or any of your contact information has changed, go ahead and update that information. I would also encourage you again to touch base with your library staff and make sure that they've done the same, because that information will be reflected on the CCS website. Okay, and then I think what is largely the biggest advantage of this project is we're now combining all of the CCS digital properties under one roof. So currently we've got our website, our learning portal left over from a migration, and our online courses and things like Simply Reports. They're all in separate containers and packages, and it can be difficult to know where to go to access everything. But with everything under one roof, you don't have to remember a million URLs anymore. Everything is living in the new CCS website. A couple of the features I want to highlight that you'll have access to with the new website are the ability to bookmark your commonly used pages and save your staff meetings under profiles. So when you log in, you'll see a dashboard that's just yours. You can do things like save courses there and save events. And you can also view all of your open tickets in one place. So it's meant to be kind of a one-stop shop for anything you would need from CCS. As I mentioned, although the site is going live on October 11th, we're also offering a webinar called Meet the New CCS Website on Thursday, October 14th from 1:30 to 2:30. So the actual intro to the site will last about 20-25 minutes, but we'll also have a lot of time for questions. So if you have explored the site that week and something isn't looking right, or you have a question about perhaps how to create like an onboarding program using the site or how things work, that's a great time to ask them during that webinar. You can register for that webinar in L2 or using the link in the PowerPoint that I'll share out after our meeting. Other things with the website. So next week, we're conducting usability testing with 5 library staff members. We'll have them complete common tasks on the website, like finding minutes and agendas, walking through our online courses, and using some of the employee directory so that we can make sure everything is laying out and working the way that it should. Okay, so before I move on from info on our new website, are there any questions about the website, how it will work, or upgrading your L2 profile?
So I have a question, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So just to clarify this in my own foggy brain, there are no library-wide web logins anymore. All the logins are individual?
There'll be individual logins, yes. Yes. Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on to our next topic. So the next thing I want to touch on is a Vega Discover demo that Innovative is presenting. So on Thursday, the 23rd from 10 to 11, our Innovative rep will be touching on Vega Discover. And just as a reminder, Vega Discover is the library catalog that we're piloting with 6 beta libraries and testing out to see if it's something that potentially could be a replacement product for PowerPack. With this, I'm highly encouraging if you have any very specific questions to bring those. The session will also be recorded, so if you can't attend, that's no problem. If there's a question you want us to ask and you can't attend, we're also happy to do that. And I also just want to stress that the demo is open to all library staff. Potentially Vega Discover is a product that we would all be working with. So I think it's nice to get a primer on the product and how it works. And this is also an opportunity to speak directly to Innovative with any questions. I know sometimes we'll get a question and say, we'll investigate that on your behalf and get you an answer, but sometimes it's nice to go to the source and be able to ask those on hand. And again, I'll share the slides that contain the sign up link, but you can also sign up through the newsletter as well. So before I would give a tour of Vega Discover, I just wanted to get a feel for whether or not this group is already familiar with Vega Discover. So I would ask if you could put a yes or a no to this question into the chat. Have you already had a chance to explore it? Okay, so I'm getting about 2/3 yes and 1/3 no, and then some yes briefly. Okay, so I'll give a brief intro to Vega Discover. It shouldn't take more than like 10-15 minutes, but I wanted you to be aware of the basic features that live there. That way, when you get the in-depth demo, if you opt to take that on the 23rd, you're not seeing everything for the first time. I think sometimes, just like when a vendor shows us a new product, we're very excited about all the bells and whistles, but as we dig into it and start looking around, we find that we have more detailed questions. So having a little bit of a primer certainly doesn't hurt. So I'll go ahead and open up Vega Discover, and I just want to walk you through some of the basics with the product. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see, or can I get a yes in the chat if you can see Vega Discover on my screen or shared with you? Okay, great. Thanks, guys. All right. So as you're well aware, Vega Discover is the potential replacement product for PowerPack, and it's very much in development right now. So there are still features that will be changing and looking slightly different from week to week as we continue to work with the product. But I wanted to give you a brief overview of what you'll find here, as well as some of the newer features that they've added since perhaps your last demo, if you've already had one. So in the upper left corner, you'll see right now that it says CCS. We're now at the point where for our beta libraries, we've got 6 different instances. So each library has the ability to put their own logo and name in the upper left corner. As you explore this interface, every week in the newsletter, we're sharing out different activities that you can complete. There is an option here for catalog feedback. So the feedback that you share with us here, this allows us to know whether or not the product is working for you or if something isn't displaying the way it should. We can then bring that information back to Innovative. It's directly communicated with them so that if you don't like the way something looks or you have good feedback, we're sharing that with them and working to correct it before that would ever reach any patrons. In the upper right here, you'll see right now we have English and Spanish as options. Were we to use this product, it would contain the same languages that we use with PowerPack. One of my favorite features is under our help button here. Currently in PowerPack, we have help that pops up and covers the screen, but Innovative has created a really robust amount of help topics here that can be searched, as well as quick tutorials that sort of outline whatever you would want to do in Vega. Next to that, we have what looks like library info here. Clicking on that will give you basic hours for your library. We've got some dummy info here now, but were this to be adopted, for example, like Northbrook, you would see your hours information reflected here. Okay, then we've also got a bookmark. We'll touch on bookmarks in a moment, but that allows you to see your saved titles. And then under login, which I'll go ahead and do here, this is where patrons can go ahead and actually log in and sync up with their library. Okay, and you can see once I've logged in, I can go ahead and see my home library here, quickly view checkouts, holds, fines and fees, and my library's expiration date, library card expiration date if there is one. Okay. In the main search bar here, you'll see that all searching has been combined. So rather than the advanced search or search by title, we have one search bar that's taking care of all of that in one place. And then we have also the ability to search by authors, concept, which is really just a subject search or a title. When we search by all, we're just doing that basic keyword search. Okay, I'll go ahead and put in a book title here so we can see what those search results look like. Okay, so probably Vega's biggest claim to fame are these format rollups. I believe this is what everyone is the most excited about, but I can easily see all of the formats in one place. Also, along our search results, you'll see a refined search results option along the left side. So I can do things such as quickly limit by my format or limit by my location. I can also move this over to the left so I can focus more thoroughly on my search results. Okay, so within the format rollup, there's a couple things that I want to point out. So within our format rollup, I can quickly see if a book is available immediately with the green lettering underneath each format. Here I'll see that for One Good Turn by Kate Atkinson, it's not available at ELA, but I can see that it's available at one or more locations. What's nice about this is it shows the first 6 locations, but were we to adopt Vega Discover, a library could choose the 6 locations that show up first. So for example, if you were the Morton Grove Library, you might want to point to Niles or Des Plaines because they're your neighbors. If you were Glencoe, you might want to point to Winnetka or Northfield or Lake Forest because it's a neighboring library. So you have more control over what your patrons are seeing in this space. So you're not, for example, at like Des Plaines and pointing your patrons to Algonquin 30 miles away. So some of that customizable options are helpful as far as pointing patrons in the right directions. Okay, so Innovative is still working on the way that e-content will display. That's not fully integrated, but it will show up in these format rollups as well. Okay, so the other information that you'll see here is the option to view all locations. So after your first 6 libraries that you've selected, clicking View All Locations will give you the ability to scroll through all CCS libraries and see where the item is unavailable and see where it is available. When you choose a library, you'll be given the option to see the item's call number as well as some basic information such as the language, number of pages, and the pub year. Okay. Other information you'll see here that I want to point out is that when your library doesn't have an item available, again, it'll show everybody else who has that item, but when no copies are available, it's nice and red. So they are making use of color very quickly to show you what's available and what isn't. All right, so last but not least, let me just show you real quick how a hold would work here. So I can see that the copy that I want isn't available at my library, so I go ahead and place a hold. When we work with holds, just like now, you can select your pickup location, but there is an additional feature that says I don't need this item after. So for example, let's say I wanted to take this with me on a vacation. I could say that if the item doesn't reach my library by next Monday, I don't need it. Perhaps I'm flying out Tuesday. I can go ahead and click confirm location. And the nice thing about that is that I'm not gumming up holds and taking up time with something that I may or may not need. All right, so let's talk about where you can go to get more information on the title. So I can either click on the title or edition information, and that will take me to what is essentially the equivalent of full display in Power Pack. And within here, I saw a question from Anne. I'll go ahead and get to that in just a moment. Within here, there's information that I can see that can help me determine which copy I might want. So for example, I mentioned I might want this for vacation. Under edition information, I'm able to see that there's a paperback edition and there's a hardback edition. So patrons can easily distinguish between which copy they might want, and they could place a hold on that edition instead of, in the example like I just did, I'm just going to get the first available. The other thing they can see here is under details. Again, this will probably be more helpful for librarians, but we get a lot of questions about where this info is. I can view all of the basic information about the book, but I can also find its bib ID number down here. So when we're reporting problems with the title or how something's displaying, seeing its bib ID makes it very easy to identify that and work with it if we need it to do that. Okay, I did see a question come through in the chat. So Anne from Glencoe asks, when a book is unavailable at your library, but available at other libraries, does it still show green or does it show red? I can see this being confusing for our youth patrons. Yeah, so if I go back to the example here, it will show green as on shelf at one or more locations. However, that's because we're logged in at CCS. If I was logged in at Glencoe or logged in at Niles, this shows red as unavailable for those locations. Because we're at CCS's branch, it's showing availability for all libraries at one time, unless no copies are currently available for checkout anywhere. Okay. All right, so we've touched on what you'll see in that detailed area. One more thing I just want to touch on down here is we've got a details tab and a related tab. Under details, we don't have any here yet because Syndetics, that's the name of the company that provides those book jacket covers that we use in PowerPack. Those aren't available here yet, but in the future, we would see recommended titles listed under details. For now, under related, it's trying to identify related resources or books we might like, but eventually that will wind up under the details tab. Okay. So as I move down, I can also see what they're calling contributors. So these are people related to the resources. So I can see narrators. These would be narrators that had helped to produce the audiobook. I can also see the author page. So were I to click on Kate Atkinson, I can see other resources related to her, as well as related people and topics. Okay. All right, so that's working with fiction, but I also know that we spend a lot of time doing research on nonfiction topics, whether for personal interest or most of the time for students coming into our libraries. So Innovative provides this idea of something called concepts. So for example, if I do a search for global warming, as I begin to type, it will predict what I'm typing, but I'll also sometimes see options for view the concept, global warming. So the global warming page, like any other concept page, can be a great resource for jumping off when you're working on research. So within resources, I will see titles related to the resource that I've put in. Additionally, I'll also see related topics. So sometimes when we're viewing one topic, we might want to see what else is related to that. So for example, I can see that greenhouse effect would be related, and I could jump over to that topic and then view more titles related to it. But the idea is it's a nice way to connect different things within the library and also help us quickly identify topics and people who might be related. So it's meant to be a discovery tool to help out with research. Okay, so that's all I really want to touch on with searching here. I'd like to spend some time in account. So the My Account page here, they call it My Bookshelf, but essentially it works just like My Account does in PowerPack, but I believe, in my opinion, it's a more robust feature. So for example, just put in any title. Let's say that I'm interested in The Giver of Stars. I'll go ahead and tap the For Later. When I do that, it's automatically saving For Later to my account. So down at the bottom, you'll notice that we have an option for My Bookshelf, Bookmarks, and Save Searches. I can also access that by clicking the Bookmarks button from the top. So if I hover over that, it takes me to the title I just saved, as well as to others. Instead of just from the top, I can also access that by clicking bookmarks in the bottom. So patrons can pull up their account from the bottom area while they're working, or they can access it by clicking their name at the top. So within bookmarks, this looks a little bit like Pinterest. People have different lists that they can save to. For example, this is my for later. So while I've been searching, I've just been checking books that I'm interested in. They can quickly create saved searches. So for example, under my saved search here, I've got one for user experience. So as titles that appear under user experience are added, I can go back to the search at any time by clicking on it here. And as I add more, they'll populate this area. Same goes for bookmarks. As I add more titles, I can quickly curate reading lists. So it feels a little bit like kind of a Pinterest Goodreads combo. Okay, so let me talk to you a little bit about what the bookshelf area looks like. So again, this is very similar to my account, which we're used to working with in PowerPack. So some of the differences you'll see is that this is a little bit more of a robust layout. Takes up more of the screen. It's a little easier on the eyes to read. So I can see my checked out titles, their format, and I can see when something was checked out and when it's due back. Just like before, I have the option to renew, and I can also sort by due date, and I can sort by title. It's a nice way to quickly see what's due very easily, or just look at everything by title if that's what you prefer. And then underneath holds, this has all of the same functionality that we saw in PowerPack and a little bit more. So with this, I can see my different titles. I can see my place in line. That would probably be something we would suppress because as we know, that's not always the most accurate. I can see my pickup location and when my hold would end. Underneath cancel, there's also this option called freeze. This is very similar to the pause and unpause option that we have now. Clicking freeze allows me to freeze that hold until I come back in and unfreeze it. It's particularly handy for titles like this one where I'm the next person in line. Perhaps I'm not ready for that book quite now. I can go ahead and freeze that, and then when I'm ready to actually have that fill my hold, I can go ahead and unfreeze it. Okay. And then last but not least, we have our fines and fees page. I know a lot of us are getting away from those fines, but people will see their fees here. And then underneath profile, patrons can go ahead and view their general information. Under edit, they can go ahead and add a nickname, but that's the only thing that they can change at this time. But that's your general overview to Vega Discover. I just thought it would be nice to have that intro so that you're not seeing it for the first time at the innovative demo. So if you see something that looks off or something that you have more detailed questions about, you're able to ask those on the spot and nothing is surprising. Okay, so are there any questions about Vega before I go ahead and move away from Vega and into our next topic? Nope. Okay, great. All right, so what I wanted to touch on next had to do with usability testing in Vega Discover. So before we kind of jump into that, I wanted to give you a short introduction to why we're doing this usability testing and what we would expect to learn. Oh. Sorry about that. It seemed to have, that was not what I was expecting. Apologies. Let me load that back up. There was a point I had recorded that for the UX advisory group, so I'm sorry you had to hear my voice there kind of double tone over itself for a moment. Okay, so now getting into it. What I want to cover here is just an introduction to why we're doing usability testing and why at this time, instead of with a finished product, why it might be more valuable for us to do this usability testing now, what we can actually expect to learn from our patrons, like what are actually the expectations and things we want to take away, and what does the process look like for our libraries and for CCS. So I think one of the biggest things is it's been noted that we've done some usability testing with PowerPack about a year and some change ago. We had worked with 5 different libraries to speak with many patrons about what they were enjoying and what was difficult about the Power Pack. But I think what was a little hard about that is we were assessing a product that was fully finished. And sometimes it's very difficult to go back and say, I wish this was different, or I wish I could make this change, because you're not a developer. So you can do things like change the wording or change the color, but you can't change the software design. And what Vega Discover is offering us is, because it is their first time developing this product for a consortium, we have the ability to speak with developers that are working with the product now. So for example, if, as Anne noted earlier, if it's difficult for younger patrons to identify that the red and green colors make it hard for them to find whether something is available, or if we find that perhaps the roll-ups aren't looking the way we want them to, or patrons have difficulty finding hoopla content, we can get really nitty-gritty about what works and what doesn't work with this product. And it's because we're getting in early versus having to go back later on and say this didn't work or this did work. I think it's very similar to like when you're baking. When you're adding ingredients, it's a lot easier to make adjustments and say, I wish I'd added more sugar. I should have stirred that a little longer. But when you have your finished cookie or cake, you can't go back and make those changes. But we're sort of working with the recipe at this level, and we can make adjustments so that the final product is something that works better for our patrons. Okay. So as I sort of mentioned a moment ago, so the value with usability testing, why doing it? Why do it? So the biggest thing is that with usability testing, we're getting research data based on our patrons' behavior. We certainly know how our patrons work with the catalog because we see them do it every day, but we also have very specialized knowledge as librarians that sometimes keeps us from seeing how patrons interact with things, because there's so much jargon and there's so much knowledge we have about how different formats work and how we would select the best title, and that can be a little different than how patrons search. So we're actually able to see what people do rather than what they say they do. This allows us to make sure that we're seeing things from the user perspective instead of our own professional perspective. We can also make sure that patrons can complete essential tasks using Vega Discover. So we can have them go through what we would call our 10 essential tasks and make sure that they're able to complete each one fully, and that the process is delightful and it's not troublesome and difficult to work through. Once we've done that, we're able to see what works and what doesn't, so we can provide recommendations to innovative based directly on the feedback that we've gotten from our patrons. I like to think of it as the ultimate like try before you buy with Vega Discover. So if we're going to invest like our time, money, and resources into learning a new product and having our patrons learn it and developing training for it, we want to make sure that it's something that works for our libraries, but also for our patrons as well. Okay, and then what is also real great with usability testing is that our best results are going to come from testing with 5 users and then running as many small tests as we can. So perhaps running one right up front to get usability recommendations to start, and then once again with the finished product, so we can see how those recommendations translated into real improvements for our patrons. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, usability testing is watching people try to use a product, in this case Vega Discover, and 1, with the intention of making it easier to use, which we're certainly trying to do by giving feedback to those developers, and then B, proving that it's easy to use. So if we can prove that this is something that's easier to use than PowerPack, then potentially it's a good replacement product, but only if it meets those 2 criteria. Okay, so we know what usability testing is, but how do we make it remote? So typically we would do usability testing in a lab, one-to-one, but with the way things are and with how many libraries we have, doing it remotely allows us to test quickly with more people. So for example, I can test with a Desplains, a Niles, and an Algonquin patron all in the same day without driving an hour in each direction to our various libraries. So we do this remotely using video conferencing software like Zoom. So we give patrons tasks and we ask them to think out loud while they're completing them, so they can tell us if something didn't behave in the way that they expected, or if something is frustrating. But by asking them to think aloud, we have them react to the task as they're completing it rather than trying to remember how that task was later on. So a facilitator, in this case, that's usually me, I send the task over the chat, and then I assist the user as needed if they have a question. But for the most part, they're reading it out loud and then they're completing it. And then we have 1 to 2 note takers writing down what was difficult or if there are any key things that the patron is saying to us that give us insight into what was simple or what caused a usability problem for them. Once we hang up with the patron, we have a debrief session. So the facilitator and note takers come together and talked about what worked and what didn't. And the whole process takes about 2 hours on the outset. As we all know with patrons, sometimes we have those technical difficulties. So in a perfect set of circumstances, we might usability test for 45 minutes and debrief for 15, but we like to allow for a little time if we have any of those snafus with cameras. Okay, so what can we actually expect to learn from usability testing? What's reasonable here? So we always start out with what we call our study goals. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you. I, like everybody in this group, far too much to read through a PowerPoint like that. But essentially, it comes down to two main study goals. The first one is determining whether patrons can find, select, identify, and obtain materials. So that comes from the 4 Ferber user tasks. So the idea is there are these 4 essential tasks that any library catalog should facilitate. So when we talk about finding materials, we're making sure that they can search for the things that they're looking for, select that they can find their desired format. So we want to make sure they're getting a book, not an audiobook. They're getting the format that they actually desire. And then identify, that's ensuring that they can determine whether something is available or not, and then obtain. So once they've said, okay, great, this is at my library, where do I actually go on the shelf to get it? Or if it's not there, how can I actually place a hold to get that material in hand? So in this case, we want to make sure all 4 of those needs are met when using our catalog. And then account functionality. So this is just taking the patron through the account and making sure they can do things like reset their passwords, sign in and out, manage their holds, things that we would want any person to be able to do on an account. Okay. All right. So what does the overall process actually look like? So we begin with the test plan, which I mentioned a moment ago. So that's where we've got our study goals, and we're taking the time to write those out carefully to make sure that we're testing in the way that we should to grab all of the important data points. Then we recruit participants. So in this case, I'm working with our 6 beta libraries to recruit directly with their patrons to make sure that we don't get patrons who've never used a library catalog, but we also don't get patrons who are such super users and love PowerPack so much that they'll never want to change from it. Because we all know that change is hard for patrons. So we want to find somebody right in the middle who's familiar with the catalog, but isn't necessarily an expert. Once we've recruited our patrons, we conduct the usability testing. That's that process I walked you through a moment ago. We debrief, so we talk about the sessions that occurred and what we saw with many of the patrons sessions over session. And then we summarize all of that into a findings and recommendations report. That is then shared with Innovative, and it's also looked at by the User Experience Advisory Group. So the advisory group reviews that report and determines whether or not Vega Discover would be a good replacement for PowerPack, or whether or not it's a flub and we don't like it. Ultimately, they'll take that to governing board, who would decide whether we want to forego Vega Discover or whether it would be a good thing to adopt. But this type of rigorous testing allows us to make sure if we do recommend yes, that we do so for good reason and that the product meets all of our needs. Okay. And then last but not least, the second type of testing we would do would be quality assurance testing. So with quality assurance testing, it's a little bit different. I'll touch on what quality assurance testing is, how your library can participate, and then what happens with all of the research that we gather from QA testing. So what is QA testing? So the short way to talk about it is it's used to prevent issues in a software, product, or service before the product would get in the hands of the users. A type of QA testing, the type we're doing here with our library staff, is called acceptance testing. So with this, we're given a set of criteria, and we want to make sure that the software meets it before it would ever get into the hands of patrons. So in this situation, it's making sure these criteria are met by having library staff look for them first before patrons would run into an error. So for example, we're all very aware that there are different types of materials in PowerPack, and sometimes they can display a little differently from place to place. So what we're doing with Vega Discover is sharing out lists of these types of materials, and we're having library staff make sure that they can locate a matching record for that type of material, determine its availability, find a call number, and place a hold. So these are those further line tasks that I touched on earlier. But by having library staff ensure that these are doable before we share this with a patron, we encounter any errors before a patron would. And these are bite-sized activities that take 20 to 25 minutes. But by doing this, we can find any errors and report those back to Innovative before a patron would find those errors. I'd always like to send something to Innovative and find that problem first rather than have a patron share it with you at a public service desk. Okay, so what happens after we collect all that information? So as I mentioned a moment ago, CCS develops a working list of functionality problems or bugs. Those are then handed off to Innovative and they can address them before we go live and then potentially before we get to usability testing too. So patrons are able to focus on whether the path and the navigation works for them rather than saying a display works off or something doesn't quite look right. Patrons are also not having to deal with these bugs because we've already done the due diligence of combing through the software on their behalf. Okay, so that's all I had in regards to Vega Discover and the usability testing we're doing. Are there any questions on that? Things that we might test or how any of that works? Okay, great. I'll go ahead and move on then. All right, so I just wanted to share, we have 2 DEI continuing education opportunities coming up, and they both have to do with collection development. And our organizer, oh, I just got a quick chat. Let me see here. Jason asks, yes, Jason, we did ask the people to put their names into the chat. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so for the DEI continuing ed opportunities, Rachel, our cataloging librarian, had asked me to share that we have both of these coming up. We were awarded a grant that allowed us to provide some DEI opportunities in relation to collection development. Some are being put on by colleagues and some are spaces where we've hired speakers to come in. So for both of these, they're working to, in one case, this is 3 librarians that are sharing their story about how they audited their collections and what worked for them. And I believe that each one is representing a different department of the library. So we've got a youth, a teen, and an adult services librarian walking through how they did their own DEI audit. And then secondly, we have a speaker coming in to talk about developing African American, African, and Caribbean collections in the library and some of the practical tools that you can use in order to do that. When I share out the slides, these links will both be in here. They're also in L2 if you did want to register. Okay, and that takes us to the end of our updates. Our next meeting is December 9th at 9:30. We're keeping with the virtual meetings through this year, but I will go ahead and share RSVP and agenda stuff for this meeting when we get closer, or Liz will share that information. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to open discussion. If there were any other topics anyone wanted to touch on or questions they had for the group, now would be a great time to ask those. Okay, I'm getting silence. I think we're probably okay to adjourn then. Liz, did you want to close this out?
Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
This
Okay.
is John Wilmette. I move to adjourn.
Can I have a second?
This is Meg from Prospect Heights. I'll move to second.
Thank you. Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
Okay, great. Jason and Liz, we'll go ahead and